The first recorded theory with a racial component was done by Francis Gallatin. He was the cousin to Charles Darwin. Gallatin believed that European races were superior in their intelligence to other races, and in fact that they were the fairer individual and more intelligent. He stated that it will be well to dwell for the moment on the color of the eyes and hair, which might be thought at first sight to have no obvious bearing on the general efficiency of the nation. This is far from being the case. The British nation is partly a blend and partly a mosaic of very distinct types. The short, black-haired ancient British races unites imperfectly with the tall, fair-haired Danish or Scandinavian. Their union resembles what druggists call an emulsion, that is, a mixture of oil and water, so well shaken together that they form an apparently homogeneous substance. But the combination is not durable. Leave the emulsion alone, and after a longer or shorter time, it will separate into its component elements. Types are stable, but the forms of their mongrel offspring are not. And whenever their external features of the old types are found in something of their original purity, it is reasonable to suppose that their inward characteristics are present also. As a result of this belief, Gallatin felt that the intelligence could be increased by the washing out of inferior genes through selective breeding. As the offspring become fairer, they would also become more intelligent. Gallatin looked at his world and saw that people of Northern European ancestry, like himself, had more money, ran society, peopled the universities, and controlled the parliaments. And for these reasons, he thought he must be superior. Through this narrow window on the world, scientists who followed Gallatin began to hypothesize that with a very broad brush, you can paint all Northern Europeans as being more intelligent than everyone else. Intelligence tests arose during World War I. They were traditionally measured acculturation rather than intelligence. Robert Yerkes and Lewis Terman were commissioned by the Army in World War I to create intelligence tests for new recruits. Their tests were rapidly determined by commanders in the field to be flawed, as the recruits showed little correlation between their intelligence scores and their abilities. The questions asked on the tests were mostly drawn from the mainstream American culture, showing that recent immigrants from Southern Europe and the Balkan states had markedly lower intelligence than Americans from Northern European descent. Yerkes continued to stand by his test and his belief that Northern Europeans were mentally superior to other races. Currently, African Americans are underrepresented in gifted programming by 50%. Their experiences may differ from the curriculum and style of instruction provided if the program is based on an outmodeled views of giftedness and program services. With the increasing diversity of the student population, multiple ways to provide programming and instruction must be utilized to meet the diversity within the gifted population. The main reason for minority underrepresentation is a deficit perspective that has influenced directly or indirectly the access of culturally diverse students to gifted programs. Educators who hold this perspective assume that students from diverse and economically disadvantaged populations are cognitively inferior because many score low on standardized tests and fail to meet the traditional criteria for placement in gifted programming, that is, scoring the 97th percentile or above. One symptom of the cognitive deficit hypothesis is the narrow definition of intelligence and giftedness adopted in most schools. Often minority students, even after identification, do not thrive in gifted programs, and the question that is raised is, were they misidentified, or is the program biased in its nature? The instruction of ELL students came into politics with the Bilingual Education Act of 1968, or Title VII of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. Ovando and Coombs, 2012, stated, "The new law embodied a consensus among policymakers that the prevalent sink-or-swim approach to to teaching English was both an educational failure and a denial of equal opportunity for language minority students. The Title VII of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act was beneficial in that it opened the door for bilingual education, but it also was vague in its goals, which led to interpretations of the title. Since the passing of Title VII of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, the form of bilingual education and how it is perceived has shifted over the years. At first, bilingual programs were viewed as assisting students to acquire English. The view of bilingual programs then shifted to only being needed to the extent necessary to allow a child to achieve competence in the English language. The English-only movement began with Senator S.I. Hakaya's views that English should be the official language of the United States and of instruction. States have shifted from English-only movements. California passed Proposition 227, mandating English-only instruction. This proposition was passed under the campaign slogan of English for the Children. The bill supposedly was to assist ELL students, but the proposition was founded on myths and misconceptions. After the No Child Behind Act was passed, funds were distributed for English language instruction, although there were no requirements for the pedagogical approach taken. Funds were distributed to states, for the states to distribute to districts based off of the number of ELL students. All students, though, were held to the adequate yearly progress, regardless of language proficiency, creating an unfair system for ELL students. Although the intentions of No Child Left Behind were to support all students, more challenges were created for ELL students and linguistically diverse educators. Today, all ELL students have some basic rights, like the rights to be identified as a language minority, have their English proficiency assessed, and to have the appropriate instruction determined, although the services that they receive are based off of the school, district, and state as well. Currently, gifted and talented minority students are represented through the Jacob K. Jaftis Gifted and Talented Education Act. This act is named after Jacob K. Jaftis due to his activism in passing some of the first legislation to support gifted students. This act took its first form as Title V of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. Title V of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act promotes the support of local education and its reform and improvements. Grant money is also set aside in this act for gifted education, as well as programs for foreign language, physical education, and the arts. The Jacob K. Jaftis Gifted and Talented Education Act took its form today as Title V of the No Child Left Behind Act of 2001. As before, funds are set aside for grants related to gifted education, with an emphasis on programs for minority students. The U.S. Department of Education states that the purpose of this program is to carry out a coordinated program of scientifically based research, demonstration projects, innovation strategies, and similar activities designed to build and enhance the ability of elementary and secondary schools to meet the special education needs of gifted and talented students. The major emphasis of the program is on serving students traditionally underrepresented in gifted and talented programs, particularly economically disadvantaged, limited English proficient, and disabled students, to help reduce the serious gap in achievement among certain groups of students at the highest levels of achievement. Although the Jacob K. Jaftis Act promotes gifted education among minority students, in 2002, the U.S. Department of Education found that minority students comprise approximately 36% of the U.S. school population. They comprise less than 20% of students in gifted and talented programs. In contrast, white students, at 59% of the student population, make up 72% of students in gifted and talented programs. There also was no funding available through the Jaftis Act grant for 2010 through 2013. Although there is legislation in place to assist minority gifted students, there is still an underrepresentation of minority students in gifted education.